So we are going to go in, we'll be in the book of Hosea. And again, we're just going to go through the first chapter tonight, which is really, it's just 11 verses. And I think through the whole thing, like I said, we're just going to get through the first 3 chapters. Beyond that, it would take us in a direction that I don't necessarily think we want to go through this study on marriage as a key. Because the book of Hosea is kind of divided up. First 3 chapters are sort of biographical about Hosea and his wife, Gomer, and what they're going through and how the Lord's using that marriage as a parable. And then 4 through 14 are more about Israel and what's going on with them and sort of the warnings and things like that. So I think we'll probably just hit the first 3 chapters. And George, I was explaining to you, and I stopped so we could get it on the recording. We're at a good point where this is coming in because we've pretty much run through how we wanted the scriptures to illustrate that Israel was betrothed to her bridegroom God. We went through all of the things of an Orthodox Jewish wedding, and we saw in Scripture how God, and we didn't exhaust it, there's more, but how God is using that language from the beginning to show Israel, I have come to you, I have paid a price for you, you are mine, and there's that covenant, marriage covenant language. The book of Hosea, to me, kind of sums that whole thing up. Because as you get into this, you'll find out the prophet, and this is a really amazing thing to me, and I was just thinking about it before I came over. And by the grace of God, there's no way anybody could do this. The prophet Hosea, his marriage to his wife, who becomes unfaithful to such an extreme, the Lord lets him know all that on the front end that's going to happen, and it is a parable in relation to how Israel has acted toward God. Now you think about this. You think about marriage, and you think about our marriages. And I'm not saying that the marriage, that he didn't love her, and I'm not saying that in the beginning she didn't love him. I'm not saying any of that happened. But to think of marriage in the sense of a life marriage, okay, one man, one woman for life. We'll say that, and to see it as it's a parable. It's a sacrifice. He is sacrificing, in one sense, a good marriage, because God has led him to this woman who, and we'll get into it, she starts out good. I think the scriptures are pretty clear, and then she goes bad. But he warns her on the front end, this is what's going to happen. And it is all a parable so that he can, and God has done this before. He's done it with other prophets and using children, offspring, these kind of things. When in the book of Isaiah, where it talks about, ask the Lord for a sign, and I'll give you a sign. The virgin shall be with child. When he said that, he had his son with him, and I think his son's name was Mahershala Hashbaz. I think that was his son's name. Anyway, he had him with him. So there was like this very, ask the Lord for a sign. The virgin shall give birth and give birth to a son. It was like this very real, tangible. Now that wasn't the virgin-born son, but it was something that was very real, very tangible as an example. And so this marriage is a tangible example or parable of what Israel has done, but it turns out in the end good. And that's the thing about the book of Hosea. I think I would sum the book of Hosea up, and I've got written in mind, Hosea is the prophet's name. Just to let you know that it's a Hittite name found in the book of Genesis. It's not the same person, but that may have been where the name came from. One commentator said they kind of do what we would do. You name your kids after Bible names, and Hosea may have been named after the mention in the book of Genesis. But I've got written Hosea, and then I wrote the story of God's faithfulness. And that's really what it boils down to. It doesn't boil down to Israel's faithfulness. I had an interesting conversation, was it with Rachel? Yeah, I think it had to have been with Rachel, yesterday or the day before, just about Israel. And why Israel? Why? And I said, because God chose Israel. He could have chosen any nation that he wanted to make his name known, but he didn't. He chose Israel. I said, but to be clear, he made it very, very clear on the front end. I'm not choosing you because you're all that. I'm not choosing you because you're going to live up to to this standard, or you're going to make yourself perfect to where I would choose you. You're not going to earn my favor. I'm choosing you because I'm choosing you. And he's like, you're a stiff-necked people. So it was kind of interesting how God, and we having that conversation with your child was a good one. But again, this story of Hosea is not that, wow, Israel turned back. No, God is faithful. God had every reason to forsake or write Israel a certificate of divorce and not bring her back. But he doesn't do that. And that's hope to the Israelites when they will be carried off into exile and all of these things will be going on. So I'll give a little background real quick. And I found this an interesting statistic. God is mentioned, or God is spoken speaks in the first person in the book of Hosea nearly 100 times. That's pretty awesome. You kind of get the real feel of a personable God. And that's one thing that I want people that come in contact with my life or contact with this church or anything, ministry or Christianity, whatever you call it, to know that there is a big God, and he's massive and almighty, but yet he is a personal and therefore a personable God. You can go to him, you can talk to him, you can have a relationship with him, and it's through Christ. And some people have this big idea, big God, but then it becomes more like a power or a force, but there's nothing real about the relationship. Well, we have a real relationship with our God, and it's an awesome thing to step back and think, well, I have a relationship with him. Not that I'm created by him, yes, but I have a relationship with him. I can communicate with him. He communicates back. This is a beautiful thing. So anyway, speaking about this, God, first person nearly 100 times in this book. Commentators think that possibly Hosea had about a 66-year ministry kind of thing, divided with like 35 years sort of in these sort of parentheses, I guess. But his time would have been roughly 700 years before the birth of Christ. Because he gives on the front end, and you'll see it, he gives some idea of other contemporary prophets that would have been happening by the kings. So that's how they kind of judged their time. They didn't say this is the year of this, because they didn't know when the year 0 would be. They're not counting down at that point. That happened after Christ was born and things. So they dated their years, or they gave kind of their time frame by the kings. And at this point, Israel's divided. You've got Judah, you've got Israel, you've got those two nations that have split apart. And God makes reference to that in the book of Hosea as well. I think it may be in chapter 1, it may not be, where he talks about they're going to come back together, but it's pretty clear they're not going to come back together by conventional means. It's going to be something happening that's outside of them. But anyway, I think that's kind of it on the front end. Obviously, title the author would go to Hosea. Some people think that because the book seems to divide between the first 3 chapters and the last 10 or so, last 11, that there's 2 different authors. It's really not. I mean, I think that when you get into it and you get the writing style and all this stuff, you realize it's not 2 different authors. It's just kind of 2 different themes. There's a break, and there's another direction that he goes with his writing. So let's get into this. Anybody want to read chapter 1, verse 1? It's a good one. It's got all kinds of neat names of kings, and they're not too bad. I'll give you guys a chance if you want to. You don't have to. All right, thanks, George.
Let's see here.
You know what? Before you do, let's pray. I don't want to jump into this and not ask the Lord's blessing. Father, thank you for this night. Thank you for those that are here. Pray for those that couldn't be with us tonight, Lord. And Father, we pray for the weather that's coming, that you keep everyone safe, Lord. But bless your word, bless it as it's read tonight, bless it as it's studied, and help us again to recognize that covenant language, but even more so that relationship that you have with Israel, and that we will see fleshed out between Christ and his bride, the church. And we thank you for that. So bless this time, Lord, in the study of your word. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Okay. Hosea. The Lord gave this message to Hosea, son of Beeri, during the years of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah were kings of Judah, and Jeroboam, son of Joash was king of Israel. When the Lord first began speaking to Israel through Hosea, he said to him, "Go and marry a prostitute, so that some of her children will be conceived in prostitution." This will illustrate how Israel has acted like a prostitute by turning against the Lord and worshiping other gods.
All right, we'll stop. Is that at the end of verse 2?
Yes.
Okay, we'll stop there. Because one of the big things, and I want to point this out, what version are you using?
I think NIV.
Okay. What do you guys have? Really?
New Living Translation.
Okay. What do you have for where it says prostitute? Do you have prostitute? Whoredom. I have whoredom. That's actually a closer Hebrew translation of the word whoredom, because the study of the word of a prostitute back then, it wouldn't have been used in this context. To be in that time, the sexual immorality that she's going to be involved in, Gomer, his wife, prostitution wasn't lumped into that. It was kind of a separate sort of word. So whoredom is probably, it's the more accurate word to understand what's going on. Because if you take it as prostitution, it almost disarms sort of the whole point of what's taking place, using Israel as an example, or the parable aspect of it. Because what it is, a prostitute, we understand prostitution. It's a woman who gets paid for sexual immorality. Whoredom, she's not getting paid. She's an adulteress. And that's the point that's trying to be made throughout this relationship with Hosea and Gomer, is that she's an adulteress. She has forsaken her bridegroom. She is and you remember now, and let's kind of plug in this stuff. I don't even know if I have the paper in here. The stuff that we've gone through as far as the Jewish wedding. For all intents and purposes, and I don't think it's too far of a stretch to make this assumption, they would have done this. That would have been happening around this time. So let's let that flesh out. So if that's happening, then the idea, maybe not the matchmaker, because in this, who would be the matchmaker? Who said it? You read it. When the Lord first spoke through Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, "Go take yourself a wife of whoredom and have children of whoredom." So who's yeah, God would be the matchmaker in this. God is the one he's got this woman planned out. He knows who it is. I don't think necessarily, and this sounds real graphic, but it's not like Hosea had all these horrible women just lined up and said, I'll take her. Because, and most commentators agree that she was not promiscuous in the beginning. In the beginning, and we'll get into why this is so when it comes to when they start having children, but that she would have been a faithful woman. So assuming, and again, these are assumptions because it just isn't written out, but assuming she's a faithful woman, then they probably would have gone through this process on some regards of an Orthodox Greek wedding. So that means there's the marriage contract, the stating of the terms, there's the bride price, there's that cup of acceptance in some way, shape, or form. She would go through that ceremonial cleansing. They would have all of the stuff involved in the wedding chamber, all of these things. That would have been taking place. So when you see that taking place, and then you realize what she does by having an adulterous affair or numerous adulterous affairs. I don't think it's just one. I think it's numerous. You begin to see Israel, because again, all of the things that we went through, that took place. There was the matchmaker with Israel. There's the marriage contract. There's that cup of acceptance. All that you say we will do. All of these things took place, that ceremonial cleansing, all of this stuff. And so there's a marriage. It's consecrated, all of these things. And then Israel has an adulterous relationship, spiritually speaking. They have the other gods. They're worshiping Baal. They're doing all of these things. And so And again, for me, this clears up a lot of the terminology that God uses. When he calls Israel, you've played the whore and all these things. This is what he means. You've been adulterous when it comes spiritually, because I paid the price for you. I did all of these things for you. And don't forget, and I think this is a good thing to touch on again, that definition of marriage, the Hebrew root word used for a Jewish wedding, and again, this is not a Christian definition, but it's to take something or someone that others might see as ordinary and to separate it out, to distinguish it, to elevate it to a holy purpose. I love that. I love that. And that came out of a Jewish wedding book, not messianic, but just straight Jewish wedding. I thought, man, that's powerful. Because you go back to Israel, and you go back to the history of Israel, and obviously didn't start with Israel or Jacob, it started with Abraham. And Abraham's there in the land of Ur of the Chaldeans, and he's worshiping the moon, and he's just living his life. And somehow, some way, God speaks to him. And it's kind of interesting, because at some point God would have spoken to him, and then they head off to Haran, the whole family, and then that's where his father dies. And then God says, hey, I'm the one that pulled you out of the Ur of the Chaldeans. So, I don't know if at that point Abraham fully grasped what was taking place, because it kind of seemed like they were pretty content in Haran. Like, hey, we're in the Fertile Crescent, things are good, maybe we'll just stay here, but God obviously had bigger plans. So starting with Israel and Abraham, he was ordinary. He was just a guy doing his thing. We don't hear, he wasn't some sort of moon priest or anything like that. We don't know anything about him, but we don't hear anything. They had some wealth, obviously, but I think probably certainly by spiritual terminology, he was just ordinary. Or even beyond that, he was completely away from God. And so God reaches down and he takes him and he distinguishes him and elevates him to a purpose. And then that goes through Isaac, and that goes through Jacob, who became Israel. And then you have the whole country, the whole people, all of this stuff. So anyway, it's good to touch on that again. And remind us what God did for Israel. And so coming to this, the Lord is, God's the one's taking the initiative with the prophet Hosea. And this is how he works in our lives. This is how he works with the prophets. Nobody said, hey, I'm going to grow up to be a prophet. They're doing their thing, and then God invades their life. And that's one of the things I always try to do too, when we're up on the mountain and worshiping in just a beautiful atmosphere. But it's kind of weird. Sometimes I have to step back and say, okay, but we're worshiping in the midst of recreation. And the one thing I try to tell everybody, number one, I thank everybody for giving a time out of their recreation to come and worship. That means a lot to me. But secondly, is that God has the right to invade any second of our lives, be it in recreation, be it in whatever, and to communicate with us, to draw us near to him, to call us out, whatever it is. And so I try to remind people, even as you're skiing, enjoy God, enjoy him, and be open to him on this day that he may want to communicate to you. So Hosea, he's living his life. We don't really hear what he's doing. It's not like he's in prophet school or anything like that. He's just living. And so God intervenes, and when the Lord first spoke through Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, go, take yourself a wife of whoredom and have children of whoredom. Now, that's kind of an interesting phrase, children of whoredom, because when we come to the kids, you're going to see, there's 3 kids, you're going to see a shift. There's a difference between the first one and the second 2. So it's not as if, and we'll get into it when we come to these scriptures, when you read about the first child being born, you recognize, wait a minute, this is not the child born out of whoredom, not the first one. So that tells us, what does that tell us about her?
She was pregnant before.
No, she was faithful at that point. Now, the other 2 children are different. The names are different, and the names are very, very significant, not only for Israel, but significant to how they came to be in real time for Hosea and Gomer. So we'll jump into this. So this is, can you imagine that? We're always, God's going to come to you, and man, we want God to speak to you. Careful what you ask for. I mean, think about this. This is, oh man. It's go and take for yourself a wife. You know, I try to place myself in these situations. Like, you know, wow, go take for yourself a wife. All right. A wife of whoredom. Oh, you know, there went all the air just completely deflated. And then go have children. All right. Of whoredom. It's like, oh my goodness. So what does that mean to go have children of whoredom? That means the children that are going to be from an adulterous affair, you have to take and make your own. You have to care for those kids. You can't just, you know, it happens today. I mean, it happens today, and marriages break up over this. He can't divorce his wife. At least at this point, he's got to stay with. He's got to stay with the kids. He has to be the faithful one in this. He can't be the one. She's going to go her way and do what she does, but he is called to take her as his wife, knowing what's going to happen. Now, I don't think when he took her, I don't think he said, "Hey, God spoke to me about you. I know what's going to happen." I don't think that's the way all this went down. And then these children that he's going to have, he still has to care for. They have to be, they're going to be his kids by the sense of him being the father. And he says, again, for the land commits great whoredom by forsaking the Lord. Now, understand, he's not meaning the land in the sense of how it grows. He's meaning Israel. He's meaning those who have forsaken him, those people that he called out, that he took to elevate to it for a holy purpose, have forsaken him spiritually. So that's, from the beginning, you begin to see the correlation here in the parable aspect of it. Verse 3, so he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Now that's very significant. Bore who a son? Bore him a son. So at this point, and we'll go on to verse 4. And the Lord said to him, call his name Jezreel, for in just a little while I will punish the house of Jehu for the blood of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. So here we have with this first child, we have it saying, bore him a son. That's pretty significant. That's not just semantics. Number 2, we have an actual name for this child, for this son. I think the sex of the child is pretty significant as well. The son, Jezreel, in relation, because when we come to the forsaking, the children out of whoredom, which are out of an adulterous affair, well, we'll see, they're daughters. And in the sense of Israel being the bride kind of thing, and I see a correlation with that. I'm not gonna lay into it too heavy, but has the name Jezreel, and again, even the child's name is going to be reference a prophetic aspect of what God's going to do with Israel. And again, this is an amazing thing for the prophet. His whole life, his family, all of these things, the naming of his kids. You talk about a man that was completely yielded to God in every aspect. I don't know how it would have gone. You know, you guys know the funny, I don't know if you've heard the funny thing. Sarah brings it up every now and then. What I wanted to name Miriam. You ever heard that? We were in Bolivia. We knew we were expecting a child. We knew that it was a female. And we knew we were going to have to come back to the States because it was just too high risk. But so I'm up in my office and, I'm thinking, what are we going to name her? Because obviously we wanted to go with a Bible name. And so I kind of had this list, and I really wanted to name her, and she laughs about this. I wanted to name her Selah. When you go in the Psalms and you have that musical interlude kind of thing in the Psalms, and it's Selah or Selah, however you want to pronounce it. I really wanted to name her that, and no, that was nixed pretty quick, and she still laughs about it. She's like, "You want to name our daughter?" See, I think it's a beautiful name. I've never heard it as a name, but I think it's kind of a neat thing, and to me it would have made even more sense because she's kind of the interlude between our other two kids and then Evan, and anyway, that's kind of pushing it. I didn't mean it like that at all because Evan was not even a consideration. But anyway, the prophet here, and I say all that if I went to Sarah and said, hey, you know what, I want to name my son Jezreel because God is going to deal with Israel in a major, it's just kind of, obviously the prophet is so yielded. And again, I don't know how much he let his wife know for all of this, but it really didn't matter. God is giving him direction. Yeah, had God really said to me, hey, you name your daughter Selah, then I would have said, look, Sarah, God wants us to name her this. But that wasn't it. I just thought it was a neat, unique kind of name. But my point is of how everything involving Hosea, everything, his marriage, his children, the naming of them, is a parable to the nation of Israel. It's all communicating something very tangible for them. So names it. He says, and on that day, verse 5, I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. I don't want to get into all that. It's there, and there's some back history with it, but it'll muddy the waters a little bit. So we're just going to kind of pop down to verse 6. She conceived again and bore a daughter. Anybody notice something different? Something missing from that. Remember the first child? Yeah, bore him a son. Second one bore a daughter, not his daughter. So this is where I think the case is made that the first child, she wasn't an adulteress. The marriage was good and bore him a child, bore him a son. Now the second one is coming from somewhere else. She conceived again and bore a daughter. And the Lord said to him, call her name No Mercy. Now, and this is also building upon this. Now, there's a reason, and he says, and God says, for I will no more have mercy on the house of Israel to forgive them at all. Now, you think about this. If this child was born to him, if it was truly Hosea's, a father, we're fathers. We have mercy toward our kids. We want to extend that. Now, I'm not saying at this point that Hosea was ugly to this child or, treated this daughter cruelly, but I think if the child was born from her and him, I don't think it would have the name No Mercy. Yeah. Yeah, and let's see. There's another. Yeah. And I'm trying to, let me see if I have it on here. Yeah. Yeah. There's another translation of that. She has not received mercy. So there's kind of that whole, all of that's sort of under the canopy of what's being said here, is there's a rejected aspect of this. To not receive mercy is to receive wrath. So there's a rejected aspect of this. So she's bore a daughter whose name is No Mercy. It's pretty clear, I think the argument is pretty solid that this is one of her adulterous relationships. Because again, remember he said, you're going to have a wife and she's going to have children, and those children are going to be out of whoredom. That wasn't Jezreel. That wasn't the first one because it was born to him. So, and I don't think that whoredom in the beginning that he's making reference to with the kids is just this canopy, your wife's going to be an adulteress and then she's going to have kids. I don't think that's it. I think specifically what he's saying is there are going to be children that will be born from an adulterous relationship on your wife's part. And this is the first one, No Mercy. She's conceived, she bores a daughter, and the Lord said to call her name No Mercy, for I will show no mercy on the house of Israel. There's the parable aspect, to forgive them at all. That's pretty strong language. Now, we know the big picture here. God is a merciful God, and I've kind of relayed the whole big story of Hosea, that God does call her back, but God's angry. And you remember in the book, or not in the book, but in the Gospels, Jesus makes pretty clear, and I've had to bring this out at times, years past, other church, in marriage counseling. First off, God hates divorce. That's very, very clear. But Jesus says something, and he says, does anybody remember what Jesus says about divorce? He makes a comment about divorce that basically there is one thing that is, I guess, acceptable for divorce. Does anybody know what that is? Yeah, it's sexual immorality. It's adultery. It's these kind of things. Now, is he pleased with that? No. But if that happens, then there is that. Those are the grounds where a marriage can break up. And there was a couple that I had to counsel, and he was involved in some pretty bad stuff. And I finally, it's going back and forth, and he's just kind of hem-hawing around. And she's there weeping, and I said, look, I said, you need to know what Jesus says about what you did. She has every right, I believe, biblically, to divorce you because you have crossed over a line. praise God, they are still married to this day. So thankfully there were changes that were made, and they're still in church, and that's an awesome thing. But thinking about this and what's happening here, God will forgive Israel. He's going to take Israel back. He makes that clear, but he's angry. And he's angry in the sense of she, and I'm using Israel as a she, God as the bridegroom, she has cheated on him. She has committed adultery, spiritual adultery on him. He has every right to send her away. Now you remember, and we'll get into this more as we get into the New Testament study of this. Remember Joseph and Mary. Remember what happened with Joseph and Mary, where she's pregnant, and what does he want to do? No, he reasons in his mind, I will write her a certificate of divorce. He's gonna do that. He's not gonna make a big deal about it, but he's kind of thinking, she's cheated on me. Now, remember the betrothal period was that strong that if she was found to be impure, that was one thing, but to be with child, that's a telltale sign. You definitely cheated on me. He doesn't know yet. God hasn't spoken to him in a dream that this is the Lord, that this is going to be the Messiah. So he sees his bride to be, his bride that he has gone through all that process with. She's pregnant, and he reasons in his mind, I'll give her a certificate of divorce. But I'm not gonna shame her. I'm not gonna, he was a righteous man, but he had that right because she had committed, in his mind at first, adultery, and God says, no, don't do it. Don't do it. This is from the Lord. This is the Messiah. All these things were spoken to him, and he was a faithful father. So God is using harsh language with Israel because he is not happy with Israel and what she's done. He says in verse 7, but I will have mercy on the house of Judah, and I will save them by the Lord their God. I will not save them by bow or by sword or by war or by horses or by horsemen. So basically, God is Israel is kind of, started with Israel. And then you remember who Judah is in the line of Israel's children? Judah, he's down the line, but Judah is the one, especially with Joseph, who kind of stepped up. And he said, you know what? It's on me. If the child doesn't return, you remember when Israel's children, when his sons went down to Egypt, and they didn't know Joseph the first time, and then they kept back one of their sons. He kept back one of his brothers, Joseph did, sent the others back and said, look, if you want more, if you want this one back, you better bring me your youngest brother. And so they're heading down there. I'm trying to remember, I lost my train of thought of where I was going with this. Can anybody find it? My train of thought. What was I had a reason for this.
It was only upstairs.
Yeah. Hey, you hit 44 and just, maybe it'll come back to me. We're just going to have to leave it there because I don't think I'm going to retrieve it. It'll come back to me when I'm least expecting it. What was I saying? Oh, Judah, that's where, okay, there it is. I was talking about Judah. Judah is the one, basically one of the oldest, Reuben, I think it was, the oldest son of Israel says, hey, if I don't come back, you can kill my kids. That's what he says to his dad. If I don't bring Benjamin back to you, you can kill my sons. That's absurd. Judah finally steps up and says, it's on me. I will take care of him. If I don't, he doesn't say, don't kill my kids, but he says, it's on me. I'm taking responsibility. So you see Judah, and Judah was a violent man. Judah was one of them with Levi, I think it was. Was it Levi? Can't remember. It was Judah and somebody else who, when their sister was raped, they went in and slaughtered the whole place. Judah was one of those. So he can be a violent man, but there was a change of heart in him. And anyway, the Messiah comes through Judah and all of these things. That's good. I found that train of thought. It was scary. I mean, I'm having those moments where stuff is just, it's not like you have a thread of it. It's gone. And it's like, either it comes back or it doesn't. I can't vouch for that. Maybe we're both not. It's like just blank. But anyway, thank the Lord that it came back. But he's saying, I will have mercy on the house of Judah. It started with Israel, and then Judah broke off in these kind of things. Judah, the lion, this strong aspect of Judah. But again, we're not gonna get into all that. I will not save them by the bow. He's talking about how he's going to do it. But verse 8, When she had weaned no mercy, and this is talking about Gomer, when she had weaned no mercy, she conceived and bore a son. Okay, so I guess that kind of blows that one theory about the two daughters. But this is the name. Again, she conceived and bore a son. What's missing from that? It's not his son. There's no mention that it's Hosea's. And this is probably why it's not Hosea's. And the Lord said, call his name not my people, for you are not my people and I am not your God. Now, let's kind of take this in the broad sense. He's meaning Israel. Israel has forsaken him, and she has committed adultery against her bridegroom, spiritually speaking. And so they are saying, I'm not yours, and he's saying, I'm not yours. So there's that break there in that relationship with Israel and God. But at the same time, it's not like, and remember, this son, this child out of this adulterous affair is a parable, but there's also a sense of real time in it. So the name has special significance to what's taking place in his marriage and in his life. And so for Hosea to name his son, you are not my people, what is that saying? What's that communicating literally about this child? Yeah, it's not his. You are not my people. It's sad. Who are the innocents in this? It's the kids. It's the kids. This daughter's living her life. Hey, no mercy. Come here. Every time you're reminded. Or, hey, not my people. It's on them. It's sad to me that it's hanging upon them. We don't know what happened to these children. We don't have that in the historical record. But, the kids are bearing the brunt of this in some sense. But without a doubt, every time this child is called by Hosea, let me try to find the real name, Lo Ami. Every time Hosea yelled, Lo Ami, he's saying, you're not mine. There's no hiding that. It's right there. And it had to be. See, the thing about this, it would make no sense if all this was happening behind a veil or behind closed doors. Gomer, obviously, in some sense, this was a public thing. It had to have been public because, again, what's the purpose of it? The bigger purpose of this is to be a parable to Israel. So people knew. People knew about Hosea. They know he's a prophet. They know who his wife is. They know the first child. They know the second child is not his. And it's not rumor. And that's the thing about this. It's not, it may be gossip, people are talking about it, but it's not a rumor. This is real. This is really, really was happening. And the people knew about it. They knew about it with the first daughter, the second child, the daughter, and they knew about the third child and the son. Gomer has had adulterous affairs. Now, here's the thing that's really interesting. And here's a part, even though the child is named No Mercy, there is a sense of mercy here. Because what would have happened, what should have happened, according to the law, the Old Testament law, what should have happened to Gomer and the men? Yeah, they should have been stoned. You remember when Jesus was there teaching in the temple and he's scribbling in the sand and they come with that adulterous, or the woman caught in an adulterous affair, and it's a setup. Because number one, the man should have been brought there too. It's not just her. She was caught in the act. Where'd he go? It was a setup. They were trying to set Jesus up, and she may have been a prostitute. It seems like it likely that she would have been, but regardless, it's a setup against him. What's he going to do? What's he going to say? What can we bring against him in dishonoring Moses and dishonoring the law? And of course, he outwitted them all. And I think I've shared about this. There's a great song by Michael Card. If you don't know anything about Michael Card, there's a great song that he writes called Scribbling in the Sand. And in that song, it's just wondering, what was he writing? What we'll never know, but he was teaching something. What was he teaching? And I don't know, it's a neat song to just kind of step back and think, wow, Jesus was there teaching. And then they bring in this ridiculous situation, and anyway, he outwits them all. And then he goes back to teaching. I love it. He just goes back and he's like, hey, I'm not done yet. But anyway, the reality is there is a sense of mercy here, because she by the law should have been stoned. Where are the men in this? We don't have any record of this. People would have known this was going on. Obviously, there was a public aspect to it. So the children now, Jezreel, we understand how that relates to Israel. No mercy, we certainly understand how that relates to Israel. And then not my people. And then we also see that these children are born out of adultery. Verse 10. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. Now, anybody remember where that comes from? Not specifically, but who was that spoken to first? Yeah. So what is God doing? He said, and it's kind of funny, he said, you're not my people. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be like the sand of the sea. God, even though Israel has been adulterous to God, even though there's that sense of giving her a certificate of divorce, God is not forsaking his covenant with Abraham. He's not left, because here he's revisiting that covenant. Remember, that's what he said to Abraham. Hey, if you can count the stars in the sky, then that's how many are the sand on the sea. He gives him these impossible tasks that if you can do this, then you'll be able to number how many children are coming through you. And the point of that, it's hyperbole, but the point of it is you're not going to be able to number them. It's going to be a number beyond any idea. So again, God here in verse 10, even though he's saying, hey, there's no mercy and you're not my people, but he's communicating something in verse 10. I've made a covenant. I made a covenant to Abraham, and therefore that covenant is passed down to Isaac and then to Jacob, who is Israel. God is not going to forsake his adulterous wife. So already we're seeing, wait a minute, there is mercy, and they are his people, or they're going to return to be his people. So even when God speaks harshly, and it's kind of like this in the New Testament where it talks about the discipline of the Lord. I don't know anybody in their right mind who enjoys discipline. It's not a fun thing. But the point of it in the New Testament is God only disciplines his children, and there's a purpose in it. And the purpose ultimately is love. I try to communicate that with my kids, especially Evan. Evan has become a boy, and he has become a boy, and he needed to be punished. I think it was last week, and I really sat him down and said, why am I doing this? What happened? And he explained what he did, and I said, okay, based on that, I have to punish you. I don't want to. And then he's like, you can fool me. I'm like, I don't get enjoyment out of this. In fact, it's sad to me. It breaks my heart to have to do this, but I have to do this. And he's punished, and he's angry, and he lays down. And then right before he goes to bed, he probably should have been asleep, and I hear from his room, hey, Dad, I love you. And I said, I love you. And, it reminds me that there are times that, yes, the Lord will discipline us if we have to be disciplined, but he does it because he loves us. He does it because we're his. It doesn't feel good in the beginning, but in the end, we recognize, you know what? I love you, God, and you love me. And, okay, I stepped out in a way that I shouldn't have, and you're not forsaking me. You're just disciplining me because you want that relationship to be right. You want me to be better than what I did. And that's how discipline should be with our children. And so here God is reminding Israel that, hey, I've made a covenant with Abraham, and I'm not going to forsake that. Yet, it's not necessarily the contrast, but it's got the same idea. Yet the number of children, even though you're not my people, even though I'm not going to have mercy on you, yet the number of children of Israel shall be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. If God wanted to, he could have wiped Israel off the map. And then there wouldn't, then he's forsaking the covenant of Abraham. And you remember when that covenant was made, when all those animals were split in two, and then that pot passed through that. And the idea behind that is if God doesn't keep his covenant with Abraham, then he's as good as dead as those animals that were split in two that they passed through. That's kind of the idea of why, because you read about that and it's kind of weird. He slaughters these animals, cuts them in two, and then puts one over here and over here. It's just sort of this strange ritual, and then that thing passes through the middle of it. But the point of that is if the one making the covenant doesn't keep the covenant, then he's as good as dead. He's as good as one of those slaughtered animals split in two. And God is a covenant-keeping God. And again, the whole purpose of this study is that God uses a covenant language or a marriage language. So again, he's revisiting the fact that he's made that covenant. He says, and in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, it shall be said to them, children of the living God. So, it's you're being disciplined. You're rightly being disciplined because you have committed adultery against me. But I'm not forsaking you. I'm sending you away. And you get into the exiles. You get into the Assyrian and the Babylonian exiles. And the idea of that's what happened to them. They were sent away. But in that time, God, you could say in some sense, God kind of wrote them a certificate of divorce. He allows somebody to come in and pull them away from Jerusalem, pull them away from the temple, all of these places, put them in a foreign land. But again, God's not done with them. He's going to bring them back. And there were some sharp lessons that they had to learn in exile. Now, were they completely faithful when they came back? No, but you see what happens in the book of Nehemiah when they came back and rebuilt the wall and stood strong, and the temple's rebuilt, and Ezra, and all these things. Things did get better. They did learn a lesson in some sense. So God's, he spoke a harsh language. He spoke tough terms with them. I'm not going to have mercy on you. You're not my people. However, in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, it shall be said to them, children of the living God, and the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together. This is where I was talking about, where the two will come together again. And they shall appoint for themselves one head, and they shall go up from the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. Again, we kind of got an idea of the verse 5, I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. So even the divided kingdoms are going to be brought back. There's a prophetic aspect of that. And of course, today we know that Israel's not divided in that sense. We understand that the kingdoms have come back. But again, the point of it is, and we get it really quick, chapter 1's somewhat of a good synopsis of the whole book of Hosea, but the whole history of Israel, in that I did all this for you. I am your bridegroom. You are my bride. All of the stuff that we went through was you made that commitment to me. I made that commitment to you. You accepted that commitment. You made it to me. You broke that commitment. Therefore, I had to send you away, in the sense of there's not that choice. You've kind of forced my hand. I have to send you away. However, it's not a permanent forsaking. I'm going to bring you back, and I'm going to keep my promises, and I'm going to bring you back. You're going to be all of those things again to me. And again, what's this? This is a story of God's faithfulness. It's a story of God's enduring love, his steadfast love. And for me, let this translate to us as Christians. We have such a patient, loving God. Even as Christians, we sin against God, and we as Christians understand more about sin than the average person. Because number one, we understand what it was like to be in it. We understand what it was like to be delivered from it. We understand what the cost of it is in relation to Christ and his death. And yet, when we sin against him, he doesn't say, I'm done with you. I've had enough. You've had every opportunity, because, again, a transaction's been made, and it's a transaction it was all about love. It was about the love that he extended to us and the love that he still has for us. So for me, when I read the book of Hosea, and again, chapters 4 through 14 kind of get very prophetic and sort of, I don't want to say they muddy up the picture, but they just sort of expound upon the picture. But certainly when I think as a whole, the book of Hosea, it is a beautiful story of redemption, of patience, of love, and it communicates to me what God said he wouldn't have, he does have, and that's mercy, him withholding that which we deserve. And that encourages me as a follower of Christ, as a child of God, that my God is so patient and so loving and so merciful. And I love it where it says you're children of the living God, a living God. Not a dead God, not a God that's far off, but a living, active God in their lives. That's who we have. So anyway, that's the first chapter of Hosea. And again, like I said, those first, we're not going to go any farther because chapter 3 is where Hosea redeems his wife. That's a beautiful picture of what happens with all of that. Any comments or questions? Anybody confused? I hope it wasn't confusing. But again, I think to me, this is a good interlude between Israel having God as their bridegroom, and then we see that fleshed out in the book of Hosea. And then after we finish these 3 chapters in Hosea, we're going to go to Christ in the church. And we're going to go to that sort of the aspect of the full or the realized redemption of Israel through Christ. Because Jesus came first to them. Why did he come first to Israel? Well, because God had sent Israel away, and now he's wanting to bring Israel back. And the only way he can do that is through the sacrifice of Christ. And of course, they rejected him. The Gentiles come in, but again, he's not finished with Israel yet. So anyway, this is a good interlude between those two, covenants. That's the best way, Old Covenant and the New Covenant. So that's where we're headed in the near future. Weather-wise, we probably will not have church next Wednesday, by the way the snow's falling.
Yeah, I'm going to be in Florida.
Oh, you're going to be roughing it down there, huh?